This episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by Jedley's award-winning children's book, The Great Maratini.
A very long time ago, there was a boy named Sam who liked to do his magic tricks, and he was quite the ham. He was called the Great Maratini, the best magician of his age, but his greatest feat took place far away from any stage. Every trick Sam tried to do would somehow come out wrong, but Sam just kept on going, and that's what made him strong. He was called the Great Maratini, the best magician of his age, but his greatest feat took place far away from any stage. One day as he traveled, he helped a stranger in need, and this was not a trick, oh no, but a magical good deed. He was called the Great Maratini, the best magician of his age, but his greatest feat took place far away from any stage. He was called the Great Maratini, the best magician of his age, but his greatest feat took place far away from any stage.
To get your autographed copy of the giant bilingual edition of The Great Maratini, please visit greatmaratini.com.
Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast and iTunes' #1 kids and family podcast. As always, we want to thank you for taking the time to join us today, and thank you for supporting the podcast and helping spread the word about how important it is and how beneficial it is to read with our kids. We have a wonderful guest for you today. One of our favorite guests from the past is rejoining us. Pamela C Rice is here to tell us about her beautiful book, Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's House. Hey, for all the authors that are listening out there, I wanted to share with you this great email that we received here at the Reading with Your Kids podcast from Dr. Linda Mubarak. She is a past guest and the author of Maxine's New Job. Here's the email. Dear Fatima and Jed, good news! Maxine's New Job has been nominated to receive the prestigious Henri Award at the 2018 Christian Literacy Awards for Outstanding Literacy Work in the Children's Book Division. I sincerely believe your certifying Maxine as a great read helped bring increased social media attention to the book. Thank you for the exposure and the great marketing. We are so happy for Dr. Linda Mubarak that her book, Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read, Maxine's New Job, received this prestigious recognition. We would love to help your book receive that same kind of recognition. If you are interested in having your book considered for our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program, please visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can click on the contact button, send us a note, and we'll send all the information back to you, or you can go right to our Certified Great Read page on our website. It's fun, it's easy, and it is really an effective way to let the world know that your book stands out above all the rest. The Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read program. I'm so very excited. Always love it when old friends come over to visit. I think that's something our culture we've kind of lost this over the years. We don't visit with each other as much, and we're really happy that we have an old friend back. She is the author of so many great books, and the force behind the Read to Me Kid Shelf books. Please welcome back author Pam C Rice. Pam, how are you?
I'm great. How are you today?
I am wonderful and so very excited that we're talking today about your book, Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's House.
Yes, that's a book that that's been on my mind for some years though, but I just last year decided to, go ahead and put it into book form, and it's just from past experiences as a child. We had a visiting uncle who used to always come and visit. So that's the premise for the book and the title.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the illustrations, of course, they're beautiful, and it just kind of reminds me of a time in the past where life moved at a slightly slower pace.
And you're exactly right. I have to go back to maybe the 60s.
Uh-huh.
And that's the era. And so it's basically talking about an uncle who used to always come up during the summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And he was from the South. He loved music, and he loved this one time he would actually get to travel out of the South. And one of the things I would always remember was that he would always like to roll his own cigars out of brown paper bags, and he would just sit all day. He would sit all day and watch the squirrels.
Mm-hmm.
And so I embellished it a little bit and turned it into a fun story, and I think it's one of my better books.
Ah, wow. And that is saying something, because you have basically you've created your own library of amazing books.
Yes.
Yeah, and that whole idea of sitting and just taking the time to sit and to be. Kids, especially kids these days, they're growing up. And our society is go, 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 go. And sometimes we forget about the value of just sitting and being with each other.
Yes. Yeah, well, this little story takes place in South Carolina. And my uncle lived in a rural area. And his house was kind of secluded off the beaten path. And it was an opportunity for us to see the country, because my sister and I had never been south before.
Mm-hmm.
So without giving away too much of the story, I'm trying not to, but it gave me an opportunity to see what the South was really like. People speak of going south, but generally it's, residential area, they have the little downtown area. This was not like this. This was really rural in the country, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And, so, just learning how country people live and how they relate to their neighbors, and the whole environment, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real value for kids. Even if kids don't have a chance to visit their uncle who lives in the South, or vice versa, if kids are in the South and they don't have family in the North, or in different countries. Pam and I were just talking about the fact that my wife and I just returned from a trip down to Panama. And, one of the beautiful things about books is that when we sit down and we read with our kids about another culture, and it can be a totally different culture with a different language and different part of the world, or it can just be, a different culture, the difference between Chicago and South Carolina. It's a great way to to experience that culture and that change with our kids without needing to travel.
And I think one of the things I tried to do in this book was to describe, not only the weather and the grasses and the birds and the insects and I tried to bring a lot of that in, so one could get a feeling of how it really was, how hot and stifling it was, how humid, people were walking down the roads with umbrellas, and so I kind of tried to set the scene of how that whole situation in the South was at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's once the child gets into the story, I think that the whole part of it, the whole story comes together at the end where there's some sense of really learning about that one little situation Sarah was in. Sarah's the name of the main character, and how she really appreciated being there.
One of the other things is I'm listening to you and you're describing all the details, the humidity, the weather, the insects, the wind. I'm reminded of, and this is something I just realized when we were down in Panama, there's so much that we don't notice in our lives.
Yes.
And, I was telling Pam a little bit about this cruise that started on a river and then we went out into the canal and we visited all these islands. And I'm looking at this island and it was beautiful and I'm seeing all the trees and everything, but the guide is like, well, look right there on that tree, which is, amongst thousands of trees, and there's a monkey there. And I'm like, there's not a monkey there. All I see is green. But then, and as I adjusted and with her help, I was able to see, whoa, there's not only one monkey, there's a whole troop of monkeys. Right. And it's incredible of how much we miss. And so I love the fact that a book like Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's house helps kids remember and helps parents remember to kind of slow down and to start noticing everything that's happening around us.
Yeah, and I think too that, what's important to me, one of the main things that's important to me is that I like to set the stage so that you're not just reading words and reading about any one particular character or characters. I like to kind of set it up so that a person or a child can see, the environment that they're in. They get to feel it. The smells, the weather, the lay of the land. Because I think that helps one visualize, and then you become closer to the story that way. So that's one of the main things is really important. I always try to do that initially in the beginning of the story is to set it up so that there's an environment in which the character is actually involved.
That you bring up a good point, that whole idea of visualization. And I've done this a couple of times when I'm doing a presentation in a church and we're talking about a story that from the Bible that kids and parents have heard hundreds of times over and over, and it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And when I start discussing it, I first start talking about, hey, imagine this: you're here, and the wind is blowing, and talk about a little bit about that. Like if a family's sitting down and reading Whistle Stop at Uncle Willie's house, and they've read it through once and they love it, and they're going back to read it again. And instead of just reading it again, how can parents really help their kids visualize being down there in the South and being right in the story?
Well, I think, not only just reading it and being expressive about it while reading it, but maybe, associating it with events that have happened to you in the past. If you were at a carnival or if you were on the beach and you remember how, the beach smelled and you remember how the water felt. So, making those associations and bringing those in while reading the second time around or the third time around so that yeah, they're finally putting two and two together. So you almost need to have some kind of association so that kids can relate to what you're actually talking about. It's, that's critical, I think, in any situation. You need to associate it with something so that you really get it. That helps. That always helps.
And I think it's a great exercise for us to do with our kids because it's kind of like training. We're just not doing this so that they can enjoy that second or third or 10th reading of Whistle Stop at Uncle Willie's house. It's helping them to remember to do this and lots of aspects of their lives, whether it's, reading other stories or trying to imagine, problem solve, a challenge that they're facing, or just trying to put themselves in somebody else's shoes so that they can have some more empathy for them.
And I think too that, what I've also done when we talk about Sarah actually learns how to whistle from her uncle. In that particular case, maybe whistling becomes a part of the reading the story. I mean, can a child whistle? How do you whistle? Making that association. And so that's when I did the trailer for Whistle Wacth, there is actually a child whistling or trying to whistle. So, that comes into play. I do a lot of trailers for most of the books. They do have because it kind of adds another dimension to it. I think when I do write descriptions. Descriptions are all fine and good, and so are illustrations. But when you see the visual and the images working together with the soundtrack, I think that adds another layer to the story itself, because each story has a soundtrack. And so that's another way of setting the tone for each book. When I did the sugarcane ride, the story takes place in Peru, and so I use a Peruvian song track to kind of set that mood up for the story. And so I look at the book in several different ways, and so that it becomes more meaningful. But that's all a part of trying to tell the full story, is making sure that there's a package that works well, and that it's easy to explain and easy to understand.
Yeah. Talk about spending quality time with our kids. I mean, just kind of, I just love how your books enable families to immerse themselves in these stories through the images and the stories and the music and the trailers. It must bring a lot of joy to you knowing that families are out experiencing and having these experiences with your art.
Yeah, it's actually quite nice. I was asked at one point, what comes first, the story or the visuals? And I had to answer the visuals, because a lot of times when I have a story in mind, the first thing that comes to my mind is the visual. Because I've always been in visual communications. So a lot of times the visuals will lead the story. And so it's a back and forth kind of thing, but the visuals really carry it. it helps embellish the story. A lot of times I could add little bits and pieces to the illustrations, and I can translate that into words, and that becomes an embellishment to the story. So there's a couple of ways I like to approach it, but visually is usually the main approach.
Yeah.
So.
And the visual you've created for Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's house, they're just, I think they're just perfect. I mean, they just set that tone of kind of, this is going to sound weird, but you know, when I look at the cover and some of the art inside, and it just kind of relaxes me. You know, there's other art and there are other children's book where the art, it just kind of pumps you up. You look at it, it's like, whoa, you know, boom,
Yeah.
and you got your juices jangling there. But with yours, it's just really kind of it just kind of helps you kind of get into that mellow. We're in the country. Let's sit back and experience everything that is in front of us.
Mm-hmm. And that's from trying to interpret what I remember.
Mm-hmm.
And also I see the imagery as being on the level of art, of, you know, fine art, where I like to work with textures and I like to work with a certain color palette, and you know, they only use really bright and vibrant colors when the story calls for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that colors, like anything else, has a place, and they should be used when it's necessary. And a lot of times I'll stay with a pretty muted tones palette, and then when, you know, if I'm focusing on one person, or that might have that's a character that might come up as a main character or a secondary character, then I highlight them with, you know, a more intense color, a brighter color. And so that all plays into the part of creating the story of what the actual visuals will look like.
Beautiful. Well, you are a master at this, and everybody, really encourage folks to check out Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's house. And I also wanted to encourage folks to visit your website, because your website is just spectacular. In addition to letting you know about Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's house, people can find information about all of your books and so much more. So why don't you tell folks, remind folks the address on the internet where people can connect with you?
Well, the address is www.pamricedesign.com, and right in the center, there's a kid shelf books. There's a nice tab there, and you can click on it, and it'll take you right into that little porthole with all the books that will include not only descriptions and illustrations, but also the trailers for each book.
Yeah, it's a great site. Your books are great, and you are a great guest. And the great thing is, as I'm looking at your website, we already spoke about Aaron's Dream. There's so many other books that we can speak about, and I know you're always creating new work. So I just look forward to the fact that you'll be coming back soon to tell us about one of your other beautiful books.
I'd love to. I've got 2 in the wings waiting to put out.
Awesome.
And those should be quite interesting too.
Our guest today has been Pamela C Rice. She is the author and illustrator of Whistle Wacth at Uncle Willie's house. Check out our website, pamricedesign.com. Pam, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thank you, Jed. It's been a pleasure.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be coming to us from Milton in the beautiful state of Delaware. Her name is Judy Folmsby, and she is the author of Bubba the Busy Beaver. Hey, if you are the author of a great children's book, we would love to help you tell the world all about it. Being a guest on the Reading with Your Kids podcast, it's fun, it's easy, and it is absolutely free. All you need to do is to go to our website, readingwithyourkids.com, click on the contact button, let us know all about your great book. We will let you know how easy it is to be on the show. Hey, we want to thank Pam C Rice for being here today, and of course we want to thank you. Thank you so very, very much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so much for taking the time to read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.